Mapping a life is a little like mapping a constellation. Moments of light, burning light, can figure itself into a kind of form. And we are here today to celebrate the poetic life of Barbara Schwartz, painter, sculptor, teacher, and friend. And I'd like to use a philosophical sort of quote raised by the artist Vincent van Gogh. And in a letter to his brother Theo, he writes the following, and this is in regards to his painting Starry Night. Is the whole of life visible to us, or isn't it rather the side of death we see only as one hemisphere? Painters, to take them alone, dead and buried, speak to the next generation or to several succeeding generations through their work. Is that all there is, or is there more to come? Perhaps death is not the hardest thing in an artist's life. For my part, I declare that I know nothing whatever about it, but looking at the stars always makes me dream, as simply as I dream over the black dots representing towns and villages on a map. Why, I ask myself, shouldn't the shining dots of the sky be as accessible as the black dots on the map of France? Just as we take the train to get to Rouen, we take death to reach a star.
Barbara Schwartz began teaching at SVA in the spring of 1977. She's been a member of the faculty longer than I've been president. She was in the vanguard of an influx of female faculty members as the school made a conscious attempt to achieve gender parity in the fine arts department. At the time, she had some distinguished colleagues, among others, Louise Bourgeois, Sylvia Mangold, and Hannah Wilkie. Barbara was the last of these initial group to teach continuously at SVA, except when her health forced her to take sabbaticals or leaves. Although the campaign for gender parity is not yet complete, as the ratio of males to females in the fine arts department is 3:2, SVA has come a long way since Barbara began, and she is a great part of that change. In her last years, I gave her the perhaps unenviable task of teaching drawing to a room full of advertising majors. She carried out this assignment with unparalleled good humor and extraordinary success, as she had the highest uniform course evaluation scores for freshman drawing in the college, and I believe in the college's history. How this connection was made with these students, given the nature of Barbara's work, is something I think we will never fully understand, and that is genuinely unfortunate. She was also selected to teach in the school's honors program. There will be more about that a little later. Lest we forget, however, perhaps her finest hour came in defense of one of her freshman sculpture students, Clinton Bosvart, who got his 15 minutes by placing 37 black cardboard boxes inscribed with the word fear in the Union Square subway station in December of 2002. Although this project was exactly not what Barbara had approved as the final project, unlike others, she was unprepared to leave Mr. Vosvart exposed to those who were clamoring for his head. She ensured, along with the school, that Mr. Vosvart received appropriate ACLU counsel and that the matter ended ultimately satisfactorily. although Mr. Bosfart did complain about having to ride around in a Parks Department truck for 3 days, which apparently was the sum total of his inconvenience for what politicians of advanced age now euphemistically referred to as youthful indiscretions. It is clear that much of the credit for this positive outcome goes to Barbara and her efforts on his behalf. Not only will Barbara be remembered at SCA for the excellence of her teaching, she will also be remembered for the grace with which she handled adversity. These qualities are rarely conjoined and will be sorely missed. Thank you. I have promised the provost, Christopher Cyphers, who is responsible for Barbara's appointment to the honors program, that I would read remarks, his remarks this evening, as I have banished him to Albany for the night on behalf of school business. In my 7 years at SVA, I've had the privilege of getting to know a good number of our faculty. I meet most faculty at the college events, such as at an opening of one of our galleries, and some I meet while walking the halls of our West Side building where my office is located. He tries to stay away from the East Side where my office is located. Barbara I met 4 years ago under rather peculiar circumstances. You've heard these. One of Barbara's foundation sculpture students took her assignment to produce a site-specific installation that evoked some sort of reaction a bit too seriously. Clinton, the student in question, festooned Union Square subway station at the height of the morning rush hour with 35 FedEx boxes. Seems to be a difference about whether it's 35 or 37. Spray painted black with the word fear stenciled in white on the box. Well, this art project turned Union Square upside down and shut down subway 7 line for most of the day, landed Clinton in jail, put SVA on the cover of the New York Post and the Daily News. The second of that seems all right. And had Barbara sitting in my office as I had been provost for all of 4 months. A brief introduction to fire. Since that day of our first meeting, Barbara and I became fast friends. She taught her foundation painting classes a couple of doors down from my office. I would see Barbara hanging her students' work on the walls of the 6th floor. When I would peer into her studio, Barbara would often have clustered around her a tight knot of students engaged in a critique or watching her demonstrate a technique. If she happened to notice me standing there, she would motion for me to come in. It was always a treat to watch her discussing a student's work or mediating a passionate exchange among students. From time to time, Barbara and I would grab a cup of coffee and a couple of cookies at City Bakery on 18th Street. Well, Barbara stuck to the coffee, I ate the cookies. And his waist shows that fact. I always enjoyed listening to Barbara talk about her students, her artwork, her life experiences, and tales of the good old days at SVA. When was that? Having taught so many students of hundreds of students over her long career, Barbara still exhibited an infectious excitement about her students and their work. When my colleagues and I began planning SVA's honors program back in 2003, Barbara was the first choice to teach in the program's first-year studio component, and Barbara never disappointed. For me, and no doubt for all of you here tonight, Barbara embodied all the qualities of an outstanding teacher. First and foremost, Barbara sincerely cared about and respected her students, and her students knew that. Barbara expected a lot from her students. She pushed the kids to go beyond what even they thought was possible. And when students produced a painting or a sculpture that represented their absolute best, Barbara reveled in her students' excitement and the sense of genuine accomplishment. These little victories of the classroom are what make teaching so special and rewarding. I know Barbara knew this to be true. Now when I walk the halls of the Fine Arts Building, I still expect to see Barbara with a painting in one hand, a hammer in the other, and a bunch of nails sticking out of her mouth, and a band of students helping her hang their work. And when I steal a peek into a studio, I want to find Barbara on the floor showing students how to stretch a canvas. On those occasions when I do poke my head into the studio on the 6th floor of 133 West 21st, the students sense my presence and the teacher looks up. I do not know the professor. It takes me a moment to realize that Barbara's gone, and that makes me sad. I pull the door shut, studio door shut, and I move on. The students in the foundation painting class who no doubt have a fine teacher will never have had the benefit of knowing Barbara personally in the way all of us and the countless students she touched and influenced over the years did. At the expense of sounding cliche, it is the memory of Barbara that will endure and sustain us. And for me, memories of Barbara abound. I hope as a community we can find a way to permanently honor Barbara's memory, the contribution she made to SVA, and the value of her friendship. Thank you and good night.
I'm Michaela Murphy. I had Barbara as a freshman foundation student. When I met her, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. It was a 100-degree day in September, and there's 15 tired freshmen wandering around the basement of the sculpture building, and in ran Barbara with purple lipstick and leather pants, proceeding to push us around the room. It was so hot that our model had to be sent home for fear of heat exhaustion, and Barbara finally relented and let us go too. But that must have been a fitting introduction to what was clearly one of the best professors I'll ever have in my academic career. She was always inspiring, encouraging, energetic. Whenever there was an artistic crisis to be had, of which there were many, students working for 3 months on a plaster sculpture and break it in half, drilling holes through the middle of it and then realizing they didn't know why they had done that, or the best, just pouring the plaster all over the entire floor of the sculpture building and having to clean it up. Barbara would always be there, calming words, encouragement, always cheerful, never angry. But more than just that, she was one of the best teachers I think many people will ever have. She was a talented and consummate artist herself, but many artists can only do that because making one's own work is quite a task, but teaching to another, to criticize thoughtfully, to encourage, to make someone want to go on, I think is more than many can hope to do. I took her class the second semester when I somehow weaseled out of another required class, which none of the advisors have noticed as of yet. I would sit in the back of the class and Barbara would regale me with stories of old New York when she would go around with the de Koonings, or tell me stories of hanging out with Noguchi in the park, or when she had her first Thanksgiving dinner with Alexander Calder in Paris. I would sit there spellbound because I had waited my whole life to come to art school in New York City, and suddenly she was there, the professor I'd been waiting for all my life, always enthusiastic and completely devoted to her craft. I remember I read a few lines that Barbara wrote about one of her shows a few years ago, and they always stuck with me because they reminded me so much of her and her work. She wrote, "When method and materials fuse, a process occurs, something akin to magic. It is beyond explanation of words. I would, if I could, paint all the time." To me, Barbara was the embodiment of that moment that every artist lives for. Some never reach, some reach a few times if they're lucky, but that intangible something that makes us all go on. I feel very lucky to have had her in my life, if only for a short time. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joel Perlman. Barbara was a great teacher, and she believed in giving back to the system that she came from. Her mentor was Elaine de Kooning, and she obviously did a good job with Barbara. Barbara then mentored a whole generation of students, everybody from Keith Herring to Michaela. It was hard to go through SVA without being touched by Barbara in some way. For the last 25 years, I have taught with Barbara and sometimes for Barbara. She was totally dedicated to her students, and when she couldn't make a sculpture class, she would always call me and say, "Can you sub for me?" She was very thorough, giving me copious instructions on every student. She was so thorough that once in September, she asked me about subbing for her a class that was coming up the following April. Let's see. Barbara sent her foundation students to my second-year class, and you could always tell her alumni right away. They were the most excited, the most enthusiastic, the most ready to rock, as we used to say. She even sent me Clint, and she said, "You're going to love this guy." And in fact, I did. The term an artist, I think refers to Barbara. She was revered by all of us who knew her, and sometimes underappreciated by those who didn't know her work or her. But for her, it was the respect of her peers that was most important. Barbara was always working. Her studio was like a madhouse, and she was like a mad scientist experimenting in paper, glass, wood, metal. There was often so much work that you couldn't see the floor, and then you couldn't even see the walls. In the last few years, she had magnificent shows at Citicorp, at the Hebrew Home in Riverdale, and at the Andre Zarre Gallery. I used to say to myself, when does she sleep? We have 8 of Barbara's pieces, and I just marvel at them every day. I have an early bronze, which has been trying to pull the wall down for about 20 years, and eventually it probably will. When my son Sammy was born, Barbara was over there the very next day with a print for his room. The print was called Freewheeling, and I still don't know how Barbara knew this would be Sammy's mantra, because he is freewheeling. In the main part of my loft is a 5-panel work which is so much like Barbara. Wild, beautiful, volatile, unpredictable. It both completed and totally took over the space, just like Barbara always did. Right after Barbara came out of the hospital, after winning her second bout with cancer, she called me up one day and said, "Let's go running." So we met over on the promenade by the Hudson River, and we started running. All of a sudden, I realized Barbara was really booking, and I could barely keep up with her. And then I couldn't breathe, and then I couldn't speak. She was going so fast. So finally I said, "Barbara, you just got out of the hospital. Don't you think you should take it easy?" And she smiled at me and she said, "Sweetie pie, I am taking it easy." So. Barbara and Richard Johnson, her beloved companion, spent their last summer together in Sag Harbor. One day they came over for lunch driving a classic Jaguar they had somehow acquired. With the mystery of the Jaguar still unresolved, we started lunch at noon. At 11 that night, Barbara and Richard wrapped in a towel much like the toga-clad John Belushi in Animal House, were still cooking and cleaning and laughing and drinking, and I wish that had gone on forever. The last time I saw Barbara, she was in the hospital where my assignment was to bring her supplies from Pearl Paint. In the last days, she asked me for enough brushes, ink, and paper to last her a year. That was Barbara. Thank you.
American painter Arthur Dove once said that everything we do is a self-portrait. Barbara Schwartz epitomized this to an extraordinary degree. Her life and her art were seamless. She was artistic in everything she did, whether it was painting, ceramics, cooking, decorating her loft, or fashion, where she always managed to look more stylish, beautiful, and glamorous than everyone else on less money than many people spend on dinner. As a person, Barbara had a magical capacity for friendship and for creating communities of people. It was Barbara who brought people together, and it was Barbara who maintained the friendships that kept groups cohesive. She was tireless in her advocacy of other artists. She bought their work when she could afford to, helped with their careers whenever possible, and at the end of her life, dreamed of transforming her studio into a non-commercial exhibition space to show the work of her friends, and began making plans to donate the work she owned to museums in order to increase the fame of artists whose work she found deserving. Barbara revered Elaine de Kooning, with whom she had studied at Carnegie Mellon University. When Elaine died, Barbara's determination to honor the memory of her mentor by establishing a scholarship fund in Elaine's name at Bard College, where Elaine had last taught, threw Barbara into the role of fundraiser and entrepreneur. That scholarship fund, thanks to Barbara, is a reality. The same generosity of spirit and commitment to inclusivity that informed Barbara's life informed her art as well. Emerging on the art scene in the late 1970s, she was one of a handful of artists who vitalized abstract painting by joining it with three-dimensional form and drawing on both Western and non-Western decorative traditions. The playful shapes and explosive color in Barbara's art radiated the unquenchable optimism, joy, and exuberance that defined her character, even in the face of hardship. If she was disappointed with her marriages and her career, it never deterred her or made her bitter. She faced all life's adversities with courage and resolve. For 12 years, she successfully fought a virulent cancer, never complaining or allowing it to affect her art, her relationships with others, or the way she lived her life. Her humor, fortitude, and dignity in the face of life's most devastating challenges provide a model of grace and inner strength, which I and all of us will greatly miss. Thank you.
I probably met Barbara sometime in the mid-70s through Jane Rosen, who brought her to a consciousness-raising group to which Barbara Haskell and I belonged, along with 8 other artists, dealers, and critics. This group really met to talk about anything but consciousness, and we usually proceeded to drink ourselves into the opposite of that state. Over the several years we met once a month for dinner in each other's houses, we talked love, life, and art, probably in that order. Barbara had a lot going on in her life. She was teaching, getting divorced, getting married, moving, visiting relatives, building houses, making art. The memorable part of those evenings is really how each member participated. Barbara was the voice of reason. Even when discussing her own dysfunctional upbringing, I can hear her even voice trying to analyze what my next move in life should be. For most of us, meeting Barbara had a high visual impact. Lately, her hair was curly blonde, but when I met her, she was between red and auburn. She was just a stunning presence. It was always so interesting to see how she put herself together, so unexpected and yet so right. She was really part of her work. Being a visual artist to Barbara meant being a visual person. She was the same way when entertaining. I remember being stunned by the red enamel sink in her loft, so unexpected and yet so right. Barbara always knew what the good life should consist of: good food, good friends, good looks. Her work also looked good. It had the solidity of the considered object, leavened with a shot of color or surprising materials. Her interest in design may have dominated in the last few years, but Barbara was an original, and her work resembled no one else's. She never stopped working. When she was sick, her hospital room became her work, a mixed media of colors and materials. When she was well, she often traveled to make ceramics or glass in places where making the work was an extension of the good life. Most of all, though, Barbara was a good friend. She stood up for her friends. If she didn't hear from you, she got in touch. I always felt so lax compared to her. Even in the last 2 years, the times we got together were at her instigation, making me take responsibility for friendship as well. Barbara had many good friends who aren't here to speak for her. Her closeness to Aladar, for instance, meant so much to her. She brought us all into the circle of friendship. After she got sick the first time, I couldn't imagine her will to be well. She put so much energy into it and had such a difficult time medically. She seemed to know just what she was doing and did it with steely willpower. I remember meeting other women with ovarian cancer on her floor. None of those women were alive soon after. Barbara had more than 13 years of life left in her. A few years after Barbara's first bout with cancer, she came to visit me in Greece. She looked great, physically fit, wearing her surgical scar like a badge. I didn't understand at the time why she wouldn't share food. In Greece, which never experienced the Renaissance, people rarely have their own plates, but stick their forks into a central dish. It was only later that I realized she didn't want to make a point of her compromised immune system. She didn't want to burden me as a sick person. She hiked and swam. I have wonderful pictures of her winding her way to the beach in boots and a sarong. As many of you know, I have a dog who is my alter ego. At least once a week, I'd see Barbara going off to her morning run as I walked my dog. I always looked for that nimbus of blonde hair bobbing along Spring Street, doing what I knew I should be doing, but didn't have the willpower for. I've noticed that after people I have known well have died, I keep thinking I see them in the street. It must be body language in a crowd that gives me the strange sense that someone who I know is gone is walking right in front of me. The other day, I saw a blonde, curly-haired woman jogging, and for a split second thought Barbara was there, going for her morning run, illness, age or not, intrepid, moving forward with life. And I was so disappointed when that fleeting feeling that she was still there left.
Hi, I'm Richard Kalina, and I'm here to talk to you about my friend Barbara Schwartz. I knew Barbara for more than 30 years. It's hard to put an actual number to it because I can't really remember a time in New York when I didn't know her. She, as everybody here knows, was an extraordinary person. Smart, funny, kind, responsible, polite and considerate to a fault, elegant, beautiful, generous, an inspiring and inspired teacher, and an absolutely first-rate, top-drawer, one-of-a-kind artist. Others this evening will talk about her personal virtues, which were legion. I'm going to try and say a few words about her art. Barbara fit in that uneasy but tremendously fertile area between painting and sculpture, between the elusive and elusive image and the undeniable and unavoidable object. Barbara's works are absolutely here, tangible, material, insistent, but they also slip away from you, turn a corner, so to speak, and come back as something else. Barbara's work has a deceptive lightness, certainly a deceptive physical lightness. I found it very interesting what Joel said, because about 20 years ago, Barbara and I traded work. I got a wall-mounted polychromed bronze. It's open and airy, and you can see plenty of white through it. And it feels like it weighs about as much as a Sunday Times during an off-peak advertising week. It doesn't. Put it this way, it's not hanging over my bed. And I even have qualms sitting underneath it. It's heavy, and it's very pointy. But in its own way, it's also very buoyant. The lightness of Barbara's work lies in its elegance and grace, its aesthetic and material assurance, its consummate skill. Barbara did things just right. She knew what to put in, and as all very good artists know in their bones, what to leave out. She also knew how to slot in just the right degree of awkwardness, the well-considered dissonance, the off note, the pepper in the sauce, so to speak. Her grasp of scale was uncanny. She could make large things look intimate and small things seem monumental. She was masterful with texture and color, too, especially with color. She favored the bold and declarative, even when in her recent work, in her last show too, she worked with black and white, which after all are colors too. She was drawn to the clear and the forceful, but she was scarcely limited to a particular range of color. Barbara was also a master of the subtlest earth tones, the seemingly infinite range of grayed out secondaries and tertiaries, and of course, sculptor that she was, the chromatic intricacies of metallic patinas. Barbara was astounding technically, and she moved with great aesthetic success across so many disciplines: sculpture, painting, drawing, print and paper making, glass, ceramics. It's murderously hard to do even one of them well, much less be a master of all. Barbara was also part of the great tradition of American modernist abstraction, grown here but in some indefinable way filtered through Europe. Her work flows in a line from Arthur Dove, Marston Hartley, George O'Keeffe, and Alexander Calder through virtually all the significant abstraction to this day, with the possible exception of minimalism. Barbara and I never talked about influence or affinities. Artists tend to be wary about such topics. But it was clear that she kept her eyes open. She looked at things really, really hard, with both a connoisseur's and a practitioner's eye. She knew that she was part of an ongoing culture, that culture made a difference, and that she made a difference. As many of you know, Barbara had a close call about 12 years ago. She pulled through and she made a lot of terrific art in that time. The history of our culture is all too full of people who have left before their full complement of years. I can say, however, that without the slightest fear of contradiction, that the art of our times is much, much richer for having Barbara Schwartz with us for as long as we did. I miss her as a fellow artist, but most of all, I miss her as a friend. Thank you.
Barbara was a very good runner and a very disciplined one. When we used to run with her, she had the habit always to position herself at least several feet ahead of us and keep at the same time a full-fledged conversation with all of us. But at the same time, she would gradually increase the speed to her liking, and of course, as far as we were concerned, it was too fast for us. But she did it in such a smooth way that at the moment we wouldn't notice. But we noticed the effect only the next morning when we got up with tremendous pain all over our bodies. So the next time we ran with her, she tried to do the same thing. And at this point, I burst in a scream of pain that went something like this. Ay, 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 ay. And at which she answered with a very high soprano voice pitch in some kind of, we'll say, coloratura motive. And of course, without slowing down. From that moment on, this kind of sounds among us became the good morning and the goodbye. So Barbara, now I'd like to say goodbye to you in our usual runner's way. Ay, 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 ay.
Hi, I'm Larry List. I became friends with Barbara through her good friends and neighbors, Brian Gaiman and Bonnie Richlack. Both of them had travel commitments made far in advance of the scheduling of this event, and I know they deeply regret not being here to speak for themselves. In brief, I'd like to say that when your life was going well, Barbara Schwartz was always a good friend, but when your life might be going badly, in terms of art or love or health, Barbara was not only a good friend, she was probably the very best friend you could possibly have. I'd now like to read a brief eulogy sent by Bonnie Richlack from Japan. This evening we are gathered to contemplate and celebrate the life and death of Barbara Schwartz. Barbara's influence and affections reached far beyond the New York art world, especially to her beloved Italy. Her primary impact, though, was as an artist, a teacher, a neighbor, and a friend to us all here in New York. New York was the city that she desperately loved, but which at turns also frustrated her, especially once she became ill. As a woman artist, I particularly wanted to acknowledge the part that Barbara played in a remarkable place and time in the culture of New York. She was one of the artists who showed at the fabled Willard Gallery in the late 1970s. Run by Miani Johnson, Willard was an influential showcase for women artists. Barbara's shows there were on the cutting edge of the development of decorative and pattern painting. She helped make this style a culturally acceptable genre. Her pioneering work encouraged many other artists to push beyond their normal boundaries. Barbara Schwartz, though, was not a conventional feminist, and her work, as she saw it, transcended gender issues. Though her work was three-dimensional, Barbara always talked about being a painter rather than a sculptor. Sculpture was a category with which she was never quite comfortable, no matter how often people referred to her as a sculptor. In addition to her art, she developed a signature personal style as well. Her shock of blonde curls, her hypnotizing green eyes, and her glowing year-round tan, she was a standout figure at any art world gathering. I was also personally fascinated about how she kept her long, beautiful fingernails always perfect, despite her insistence that she never wore gloves, no matter what kind of work she did. Barbara was my friend and neighbor for over 20 years. Her first struggle with cancer in 1994 drew us even closer. I saw that this first brush with death forced her to reinvent her life, redefine her place in the art world, reassess her friendships and colleagues, and revise her vision for the future. Herein laid her primary frustration. Other people and events seldom moved at the rapid clip that she desired and demanded. Barbara was tough, though. She was a survivor straight through to the end. She was at times imperious, at other times generous, and most importantly, extremely loyal to the many people she cared about. She always made herself available to her friends emotionally, financially, and spiritually when they needed her. I know many of you here this evening shared Barbara's last days with her. She never for one moment doubted that she would not conquer this new bout of cancer. Some of you too are aware how difficult she could be at moments during this battle, but I hope that what you remember most is that she loved you all dearly. You were her family, just like the art she left behind. I know she was grateful for the many, many people who surrounded her. I love her and will affectionately remember her in all of her complexities, but particularly for her great passion for her art. Her art was her life, and gratefully, it remains with us.
It's amazing when you get to spend a lifetime with somebody you love. It was love at first sight. Bobby Schwartz appeared before me one day in the Department of Painting at Carnegie Mellon University. We were both art students. She was a senior and I a junior. She was the most beautiful and exotic creature I had ever seen in my life. Bobby was the original it girl, popular and admired. Also, she was way ahead of the rest of us. She knew from the beginning what it was to be an artist and that she was an artist. Bobby worked hard and loved doing it. That year, we began a great friendship. She lived in a shabby chic mansion with 3 wonderful roommates, Michelle, Dale, and Judy. They were the original Charlie's Angels, living on a diet of popcorn. Often I would visit Bobby in her painting studio to see what she was working on. Her abstract canvases were individual, colorful visions, very honest, very sincere. Her paintings were alive with playful symbols, shapes, and forms, an idea which she continued to explore in her work. I cherish these times. I, along with another classmate, Alidor Marburger, became her brothers, and she our sister. Elaine de Kooning was a visiting Mellon professor of painting that year. Elaine and Bobby instantly recognized each other. Elaine became her mentor and friend. Elaine encouraged Bobby to move to New York after graduation. Also, our dear friend Alidor was living in New York and wanted us here too. And so we set out from Pittsburgh to New York City late one Friday afternoon in my car, driving head into a blizzard. 3 flat tires and 18 hours, freezing hours later, we arrived at Rose Slivka's house on Bank Street, into Merce Cunningham and John Cage's apartment, where they were sitting Shiva for Mark Rothko. We met and were welcomed into the New York art world that day. In the course of her life, Bobby became Barbara, Bianna, and Bashwa. She loved New York. She loved her work, teaching and making art. She loved her friends. Life in New York was often very challenging, but also very rewarding. She created beautiful works of art and presented numerous successful exhibitions. Her life celebrated being an artist. And under any circumstance, her unfailing positive attitude never considered giving up. These words did not exist in her vocabulary. My Bobby, Barbara, Bianna Bashwa, and I got to spend an amazing lifetime together. Sadly, her lifetime cut short, but her lifetime well spent. I would like to read a poem Barbara wrote at age 8, Stars in the Sky. Stars in the sky are like pieces of gold. Some are old and some are young and some are old. I wonder if they're happy always so high. Would you be happy there floating in the sky? The sky is a star's treasure chest, and in it then they look the best. When nighttime comes upon us, the stars come out to see, whether we're asleep in bed where we're supposed to be. The stars above us look so bright that they brighten the sky on a dark winter's night. But in the morning when you've had your rest, you don't see the stars in the sky's treasure chest. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Edward Gold. Barbara Schwartz and I were friends for 20-plus years. Within that time frame, she had introduced me to many of the people who are in attendance here this evening to honor her. I have developed friendships with some of you since our initial introduction. Our mutual admiration always pleased Barbara. As you know, she loved sharing the people in her life. One person in particular, Judith Light, a name familiar to many, was a dear and close friend of Barbara ever since their first meeting in college and have remained extremely bonded ever since. Bashwa, as many people began to call her, introduced me to Judith several years ago, and the three of us shared wonderful times together. Unfortunately, Judith is unable to be here tonight due to circumstances beyond her control. She is deeply saddened not to be able to participate in person in this memorial tribute to our Barbara. I did receive several calls and emails from her, however, requesting that I please read the following letter to all of us gathered here. Although she cannot be present in body, this will be Judith's way to express and share her personal thoughts and feelings about her lifelong friendship with Barbara. Thus, for certain, she will definitely be with us here tonight, in spirit. Dearest Barbara, I so wish I could be there today to talk about you and reminisce about our wonderful years together, but I have to work and I know you understand. So here are just a few thoughts from so many years. I remember at CMU at the end of our freshman year in the girls' dorm cafeteria when you said to me, "Why don't we be roommates next year?" And I said, "Yes, why don't we?" You invited me to visit you that summer in Philly, and I came and met Jake and saw all of his wonderful art and furniture. It helped me to understand more what your art meant to you through your extraordinarily brilliant and talented father. We went square dancing on the steps of the Museum of Art in Philadelphia. It was a beautiful night filled with so much joy, aliveness, and promise. The fall of our sophomore year, two more roommates, Michelle Shea and Dale Briner, joined us when we became a great foursome, 2 art majors and 2 dramatists. It was an absolutely perfect fit of 4 friends. Our funny little house on Beerler Street became a safe haven for all of us. Your work grew as the years went on and continued blossoming until the end. Those were the formative years, and you relished them. I always remember your passion for your work. Through those early years after Carnegie, we kept in touch sporadically, but we were always in touch in our hearts. Even though long periods of time would go by, when we did talk, it seemed as though no time had passed at all in our friendship. I always loved talking to you on your birthday every year and taking that time to catch up. Time passed, and then you had your first bout with cancer, and I came to visit you. We did arts and crafts in the hospital. I still have the piece I made for you and have it in all my dressing rooms on all my jobs. It's that funny little cross, but it gives me much joy that you encouraged me to make it even though I had no artistic ability. It reminds me to have faith in myself, and I thank you for that. You had this amazing spirit, and you worked your way out of the depression and fear and conquered your demons. You brought yourself back to health. You always called me for help in that process, and I so appreciated that you did. It made me feel valuable in your life. It gave me permission to do the same with you. When I came back to New York 6 years ago to do the play Wit about a woman dying of ovarian cancer, you said, "Honey, I cannot come to see it." I said, "You need to, and you will love it." You came and you did. In fact, really loved it. You came back again to see the play because you said what was so moving and important to you was, at the end, when the character died, she stepped so powerfully into the light. You said that it made you less afraid of dying. I think of that now, and it gives me great comfort. The night before I was on my way to see you in the hospital this last time, I was packing, and the photo I have of the cast of Wit in my office fell out of nowhere. I said to myself, something is happening with Barbara. She is trying to connect, to tell me something. And you were. When I arrived at the airport the next day, there was a message from our dear friend Ed Gold on my cell phone telling me that you had passed on. Dearest, dearest friend, I know you are out there somewhere because I can feel you, and I also know that you are here because you live so fully in my heart. I miss not being able to see you in person, but all I have to do is tune into my heart, and you are right there, vibrantly alive and magnificently beautiful. I am so grateful to have a life that has included you. I have been graced by your life. Your brilliant art survives you, as do those who love you mightily, I being one among so many. Godspeed, my friend. Step into the light. Until our paths cross again, I am always your loving friend, Judith. In closing, Judith suggested that a song by Carla Bonoff entitled "Goodbye, My Friend" be heard. I would now like to be able to share the lyrics of this poignant song with all of you. Oh, we never know where life will take us. We know it's just a ride on the wheel. And we never know when death will shake us. And we wonder, how will it feel? So goodbye, my friend. I know I'll never see you again. But the time together through all the years will take away these tears. It's okay now. Goodbye, my friend. I'd see a lot of things that made me crazy, and I guess I held on to you. You could have run away and left, well, maybe, but it wasn't time, and we both knew. So goodbye, my friend. I know I'll never see you again. But the love you gave me through all the years will take away my tears. I'm okay now. Goodbye, my friend. A life so fragile, a love so pure, but we can't hold on. We try. We watch how quickly it disappears. We'll never, never know why. I'm okay now. Goodbye, my friend. You can go now. Goodbye, my friend. Excuse me for just one moment, please.